You will see that message pop up for you. And good morning. I am Miranda McBride, the Director of the Center for Advanced Transportation Mobility at North Carolina Agricultural and Technical State University. Thank you for tuning in for our webinar. We're going to go ahead and jump right into it, and I will introduce our speakers who I greatly appreciate for coming to us this morning to give us some information on one of the projects that is being funded through CATM. Dr. John Antin and Brian Wotring are going to be our speakers today. Dr. Antin is a certified human factors professional and a research scientist in the Division of Vehicle, Driver, and System Safety at the Virginia Tech Transportation Institute. Dr. Antin leads the Vulnerable Road User Safety Group at VTTI, where over the past 18 years, he has established a program of research related to enhancing older adult driver safety and mobility. He currently serves as the research program manager for our center and one of the organizers of today's webinar. Mr. Wotring is a human factors researcher, also in the Division of Vehicle, Driver, and System Safety at VTTI. Throughout his 14-year career, he has completed projects investigating a broad array of transportation safety topics, including interface and warning systems, interface and warning modalities, as well as evaluations of pre-production and production advanced driver assistance systems. More recently, he has begun work on investigating and improving mobility for rural older adult drivers, which is the focus of today's discussion. Brian completed his master's in experimental psychology with an emphasis in human factors at the University of Idaho. And with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Antin, who will kick off the presentation.
Thank you so much, Miranda, for the introductions and for hosting us today. And thank you to everyone who's joining us this morning to engage in this discussion. We're going to be talking about road trip, and we're going to divulge what that is as we go forward. And this is an early program readout. And as Miranda already said, this effort is sponsored by CATM and also by the National Surface Transportation Safety Center for Excellence. So you can see the collaborators below, myself and Brian. You'll be hearing from Brian in just a few minutes, and John Hankey as well has played an important role in this research effort and program effort. So first, I just wanted to mention that this is the American Occupational Therapy Association's, not this, but soon will be the American Occupational Therapy Association's Older Drivers Safety Awareness Week. It's the first full week in December every year. So even though this is December 1st, it begins next week. And so this is their aim is to promote the importance of mobility and transportation to ensure older adults remain active in the community. And while we have no direct affiliation with AOTA, I hope that as we progress in the discussion today, you'll feel, as we do, that this program and our discussion today fits in very well as a precursor to their annual week of awareness raising in this important area. So, we were introduced as being at the Virginia Tech Transportation Institute. What is that? I just wanted to briefly introduce what that is and who we are. So VTTI is a global leader in transportation, and for the past 35 years, we've been a research institute at Virginia Tech, conducting research and outreach with the primary goals of saving lives, time, and money, and helping to preserve the environment. So obviously, mobility in some way, shape, or form is important to all of us to access everything that we need: food, medicine, healthcare, and just for any kind of social interactions or engagements that we want to enjoy. So if we kind of look at it as a matrix, we can see, there's younger and middle-aged individuals, and then there's older adults. And we also have, roughly speaking, two sorts of environments: urban and rural. And so whether you're a younger person or an older person, if you're in an urban environment, you have very good options typically for transportation mobility in a wide variety of ways typically. And similarly, if you're in a rural environment, but you're a younger person, you're probably still driving and have access to whatever you need through that modality. The place where we're really going to focus our efforts in this discussion today, as well as in this effort that we're discussing, is if you're an older adult, and you're in a rural environment, then the problems start to emerge. And you can see that in terms of land use, the vast majority of the United States is considered rural. And it's only a few, the little white dots, the orange is all rural, and the little white dots are urban centers. And of course, most of the people are in the urban centers, but the vast majority of the land use is rural. So what we tend to see is a lack of alternate transportation options in these rural environments, forcing a reliance on personal vehicles. But of course, older adults continue driving out of necessity, therefore. But we all tend to acquire age-related functional deficits or declines as we age. It's all individual. Some people, very active and capable well into their 90s or beyond, and others, have a different profile. But this can tend to lead to high risk or at least driving scenarios that are uncomfortable for people. And of course, our population is aging. This is something that's well known, and we expect it to continue for several years, several decades to come. So the number of older adults is 65 and older is projected to reach almost 95 million by 2060. And by then it will comprise over almost a quarter of the US population. By 2030, which, is just around the corner, basically, in the US, people over 65 are projected to outnumber those 18 and under for the very first time. So that's a tectonic shift. And 1 in 8 drivers today are 65 and older. By 2030, it will be 1 in 5. And so you can see from the graph here, these again are US Census projections, but what I'm showing here is that the green bars are the older adults, blue bars are everyone else. The blue bars are projected, everyone 64 and under is projected to increase in the population by less than 17% between roughly now and 2060. Whereas people 65 and older are expected to more than double. So the problems that we're seeing for older adults, whether in rural environments or anywhere else, we can expect to see more and more of that as time goes by. So this is prior work that we did. We did a mobility ecosystem investigation in Roanoke, Virginia, which is a larger city nearby where we are here in Virginia Tech. This work was sponsored by NSF. And our goal is to investigate the mobility options and barriers for older adults within that area. And we interviewed providers of mobility and transportation services, as well as older adults themselves. So these are a variety of the entities that we interviewed. And this is the ecosystem that we defined based on those discussions and interviews. So I'm not going to go into great detail here, but the point I'm making is, in this area, there's a variety of van services, transit options, paratransit, to get to the various let's say, destination categories that people might want to get to: recreation and social, medical and pharmacy, groceries, shopping and entertainment. And there's even hubs available to get to localities that are outside of Roanoke. And so this is all good if you're sort of within the friendly confines of the urban environment. In fact, I didn't mention this, but Roanoke, like many cities, it's an urban environment, but there's a good bit of rural areas just once you get just outside of the local area. So for the people living in those rural areas, we found that there's a bottleneck basically right here. So if you're living here, you need to either tap, into family and friends, or if you're still driving, to get into this mobility infrastructure. Otherwise, you're having a problem. So, we family, taxi, van services, ride share, friends, fixed route transit, ADA services, paratransit, all these things are there. So what are the missing pieces? It might be some element of automated technologies. integration across providers and jurisdictions, or maybe other elements. And so that in part, is what led us to develop this road trip program that we're going to be talking about today. So what are the study goals? We want to evaluate an individually tailored program that will enhance rural older adults' feelings of self-efficacy or beliefs about one's ability to perform actions that will influence their environment, and influence their environment in terms of what? Driving safety, mobility, getting their needs met in terms of getting to needed or desired locations, as well as developing, ability to have remote access to different services. So road trip, rural older adult driver, tailored research integrated plan. That's road trip. So what are the program goals? Our goals with the program are to administer the program to rural older adults, which we're doing, and that's what we're going to be talking about. Evaluate the program effectiveness on an interim basis, iterate and improve the program, and figure out how to broaden its footprint. So, and this is, I do want to mention, this is part of VTTI's larger giving back initiative, where, when I briefly introduced VTTI at the outset, I said, we do research and outreach, but so we're very well known for doing those activities. But the giving back initiative is really where we're trying to integrate sort of programmatic level activities into the research so that we can really reach out to the community, touch people's lives and improve their lives. And I think we're going to see today that this is, we're truly fulfilling that with this project. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Brian, who's done quite a bit of the legwork on this project, and he's going to walk us through some of those more detailed nuts and bolts.
Good morning, everyone. As John mentioned, I'm Brian, and I'm going to be walking you through the program a bit more detail, really exploring what we're doing and sort of what we're finding at this point. So the focus of this effort is to learn about each particular older adult and then be able to provide them with a solution that's tailored to them that may be able to address whatever issues they are facing. And one way to do this is to look at several aspects of the older adult themselves, as maybe focused on their personal situation or environment, the quality of their sidewalk. Do they live alone? Do they have friends and family nearby? Can also look at various health and medical concerns, issues related to sleep hygiene, or maybe medications that affect drowsiness. We're also looking at self-expressed concerns. So maybe an individual says they have difficulty driving in high-speed traffic, or they feel anxious doing so, as well as performing a driving evaluation on them as well. So to collect some more objective data. The other side of this coin is to look at existing programs or existing solutions that exist. So things like geotemporal fencing and maybe alternative routing. So with GPS, we can be able to put up boundaries or polygons to surround certain areas that maybe the idea is avoid this intersection or stick to this location, or even try to maintain your driving during daylight hours, things like that. It also looks at existing programs. CarFit is a good example of this, where the idea is to fit the car to the human driver the best way possible to improve safety. We're also looking at various aspects of training, some of which surround OEM-based ADAS systems. So advanced driver assistance systems, things like adaptive cruise control, lane centering, those types of systems, as well as investigating options for telehealth deliveries. So maybe improving safety and mobility doesn't necessarily mean driving more. It may mean restricting driving and taking advantage of other systems that are already in place. Well, the road trip program itself is designed to link these together so that we can take a given need and find an appropriate solution for that need. As far as the eligibility and criteria and recruitment for this study, I want to mention, first of all, this is all IRB approved research. Eligibility, we're looking at people who are 60 or older, who live in primarily a rural or semi-rural environment, which isn't really that difficult to find around here. We've got, as John mentioned with Roanoke, little urban clusters, and then outside of those clusters, it turns rural pretty quickly. And these are also going to be people who have expressed some level of concern about driving safety or mobility limitations that have come about as they've aged. We also administered a SAGE cognitive assessment. This was done just to help ensure that participants would be cognitively fit to engage in the program. And we did some recruiting through our own database. We have a database that we keep up with of people who have expressed interest about being part of one of the research studies. We've also reached out to some other local older adult programs and helped spread the word that way, as well as flyers and social media ads. This is sort of a timeline of the whole process that a participant goes through. I just want to talk about this at a high level before I go into any detail on anything specifically. So up front, we have our recruiting and screening process, and this allows us to make sure that the person is fit and ready to be in our program and that they're going to meet whatever criteria we need. Then between months 0 and 2, a lot happens. We initially bring the person in and we will have them conduct or go through a number of surveys. We use this to collect data, as I'm going to talk about in a minute here, across a wide variety of facets. At that time, we also will install cameras and sensors in the person's vehicle to allow us to collect some, or in the volunteer's vehicle to allow us to collect some objective driving data. And then throughout this process, we will have them go out and they'll just drive and live their life for the first month. We'll collect that data and we put the objective driving data together with what we got from their surveys, and we try to integrate that, find commonalities, find things that are worth exploring, which I'll go to here in a few minutes, and that'll help us develop a mobility plan. That mobility plan is what we will then bring to a consultation session. At that consultation session, we head out to the older adult's house and we sit down and talk with them and have a conversation. We present a lot of ideas and have some back and forth about different ways to improve their driving or ways to keep them safe. After that, we collect data for another 2 months. This allows us to do sort of a pre and post comparison to evaluate the program effectiveness. Overall, max compensation is $525 for participants. So I mentioned surveys. We collect quite a bit of information here. It's primarily across 4 different facets: physical health or physical fitness, health, preference and access, and knowledge. And their surveys look at a variety of aspects in each of these. We also conduct a naturalistic driving evaluation. And to give you a little bit of background on naturalistic driving data, that's a research methodology that we use here at VTTI. The idea behind this is we'll take somebody who's volunteered to be in the study. We will install cameras and sensors in their vehicle. And that allows us to get a full picture of what's happening during the trip, during whenever somebody is driving. And we really find that after about 2 weeks or so, people kind of stop ignoring that the camera's there. So it's a great way to get information without having a researcher sitting with a lab coat and a clipboard in the passenger seat staring at them. We use, typically at VTTI, we use naturalistic driving data to do anything from turn signal analysis to glance-based analyses to looking at crashes and near crashes. In this particular project, we are going to be evaluating items like gap judgment, speed maintenance, attentive to traffic control devices, and overall situational awareness. This table shows how the results from a whole suite of assessments are mapped to specific interventions. So for example, questions from 5 different assessments will lead to potential discussions suggesting maybe medical referrals. So this would be something that the older adult would talk with their GP about. And this could include things from maybe sleep health or physical therapy or medication reviews. Similarly, for a driver refresh course, we've got 3 different surveys, or sorry, 2 surveys, and then the driving evaluation that may inform the suggestion for a driver refresh course, or at least a discussion to talk about that. And it's also worth noting that some of these interventions are informed by the algorithm, and then some of them are interventions that we just give to everybody. So we felt that they were broad enough and they're really just good information to provide to these older adults. So I've gone through quite a bit there, and I just kind of want to at a high level say, what we're essentially doing is we're taking all their survey data, we're adding it to the driving data. From that, we create this tailored plan. And this tailored plan is something that I'm going to go through in detail with you here in a few minutes, but this is what we bring to our mobility consultation session. The tailored plan itself is structured. There's an organizational structure to kind of group like items together so that it's a bit easier to comprehend and work your way through. It includes various different suggestions, such as co-pilots or instrument cluster customization, as well as various suggestions for driver refresh course, maybe training related to different technology. We also have sections where participants were allowed to put in information about problem locations or common destinations, as well as medical information, and then the naturalistic driving evaluation plan, or naturalistic driving evaluation. Before I actually pull up one of these documents and walk you through it, I wanted to show this graph here is a graph that's algorithmically defined. So I created a program that we put in data and it calculates a bunch of things and spits out these nice pretty graphs. The graphs are color-coded based on a criterion point. Now, a criterion point, the vertical dotted line, is what we have initially deemed to be a point where we think, okay, when somebody scores above this, you know, this is something that's worth a conversation to investigate with the older adult themselves. The upside down triangle corresponds to their particular score. And the color coding is really kind of nice because it helps draw a little bit of visual attention to maybe an area that a person is, oh, hey, you're fine, green, it's good, versus maybe an area where there's maybe something worth looking at, and then on up to an area that we believe needs attention. There's also, according to, or next to each graph, as you'll see here in a moment, there's whatever the item is. This one in particular, as an example, had to do with time of day. That will be color-coded based on the score that the person got. So it really provides this nice, quick at-a-glance way to be able to see how a person scored. Now, I'm going to go ahead and hopefully smoothly bring up this document. Are you guys still seeing? Are you seeing a Microsoft Word document?
Yes.
Okay. So this is the sheet that we bring out to the older adult's house. And at the top, we've got a bit of a legend, and this just really helps the adult get a grasp for what's going on here. And this is a document that we leave with them, and we go through step by step because there's just really a lot of information here. So as you can see, I was pointing out that the squares on the left-hand side are color-coded based on the score that the person got. And this just really helps provide a nice at-a-glance, quick evaluation of how somebody scored. And as I had mentioned, it's broken up into various different sections so that we've got a heading for suggestions. So this has to do with co-pilot, instrument cluster customization, or hey, we're suggesting you start to use a navigation system. Similarly, we have something for a driver refresh course as it comes from the survey data. We have a separate section related to their objective driving data as well. There's a section related to restrictions and different routing. In this case, you can see a person had actually expressed discomfort driving in the rain, especially at night. So that's why her night score is up a little bit, but in the rain kind of bumped her up here. So we were going to talk about that. And I do want to remind you, this is an actual participant's data. This isn't just something that I happen to make up on the spot. This is actually a consultation that we are going to do tomorrow afternoon. She seemed to do fine in heavy traffic, across highways, interstates, intersections, didn't express any interest in any kind of technology training. She did, however, mention under problem locations, a road around here. It's the road's Hazel Hollow Road. It's a little 2-lane windy road. And she had actually had a prior crash and still experiences driving anxiety from that. And unfortunately, that also, as you'll see in a little bit, that also is kind of a primary road to get where she needs to go. So it's going to be a major point of conversation tomorrow. We also have listed a number of common destinations that she attends to. So, for example, if we were going to suggest an alternate route to something, we want to make sure that that alternate route is still able to get her to where she wants to go. That is still able to provide her with some semblance of usable mobility. She didn't express any kind of interest in any alternative transportation. And what had said that she was comfortable or did not have any of the advanced driving assistance systems. I will say that in some of the conversations, we've been able to really kind of engage a bit more with this. And somebody may say, I'm comfortable using a backup camera, but through conversation with them, you kind of start to feel like maybe they don't understand it as well as they think they do. So it's just a great time to be able to talk about that, provide some training if needed. Her medical section actually showed a few things. I want to point this out real quick. The SAGE cognitive assessment that we gave earlier, we use this as well as part of the assessment, and it is actually reverse scored. So in this case, a higher number is better. So that's why she's over here on the right, and the color corresponds to that appropriately. But she had two issues that crept up in here. One, neuropathy. So that's going to end up leading to a conversation surrounding that. You know, is it in her hands or is it in her feet? Is it in one hand, one foot? Is it progressing? How bad is it? Have you seen a doctor about it? You know, it really opens the door for a lot of conversations. And I really want to hit home the point too, that, you know, we come up with these, but they're not set in stone. It's more of probes to help lead and start a good discussion with the adult themselves. Similarly, with an audiologist, she had said that she has trouble hearing, but doesn't have any hearing aids. Now, you know, one might say, well, what about hearing impaired people? Can they drive? Well, of course they can drive. It's just if you have hearing and there's maybe a way to improve it, certainly that has benefits towards safety, helping you be more aware of everything going on around you. Down here is our driving evaluation. So as a reminder, this is data that came off of our equipment, our hardware that we installed in their vehicle. And we look through it for a number of things. We evaluate them on how attentive they are to traffic control devices. So this may be signalized intersections or stop signs. What about their turn signal use? How are they doing that at said intersections during lane changes? We're also evaluating lane changes. We're looking at steering stability. So are they wandering within their lane? Are they making lots of small corrections? How big of gaps are they leaving between them and surrounding traffic? How often are they checking mirrors? So it's really intended to be a wide look to see if we can catch any potential problems or anything that may warrant a good discussion. Another thing that I really want to point out is secondary tasks. You know, they're just like everybody else, and they engage in secondary tasks, non-driving related things. And, you know, seeing this in the data is really helping to bring about a conversation. So as you'll see in a little bit, some of these secondary tasks may be things that we can help them improve on, not just raise awareness about, but actually help them negate some of the issues that may be surrounding it. After all that, there's a single page that just kind of summarizes all the information. So it's a quick, easy way for the older adult just to glance at it and say, okay, these were the things that we had talked about. As well as I have a number of items. These are things that either I noticed in the driving data that caught my attention, or they are things that the participant answered as like, I strongly agree or I strongly disagree in whatever appropriate direction as it relates to safety. And these are going to be further probes just to have conversation with. And they may not necessarily be things that rose to the level to cross our criterion point, for example, as seen here in these examples, but they were still things that were warranted that we thought would be a good discussion. A great example of this is going to be this traffic control device attentiveness. Depending on how you want to define it, this person's score was technically right on the line, but part of that was her rolling through stop signs. So that's going to be something that we bring up. Following all this, if we suggest things like alternate routes, we have some suggestions. So I won't go into too much detail here, but this road that's running north to south is Hazel Hollow Road. That's the road that she had difficulties on, that she saw as driving anxiety on. And we provided a number of different options to get her to different locations that have the same stores, or that maybe can just get her there via a different route. Finally, following all this, we have included just a glossary at the end. Some of these words may make a lot of sense when we're talking to the older adult, and maybe they want to go back and look something up. Maybe they just like reading a little dictionary for their own edification. But either way, we bring that out there with them. And after going through this, we leave it with them so that they have something that they can look back on. All right. And let me go ahead and pull this back up. All right. So the consultation sessions themselves, we conduct these at the participant's home. We're working with drivers that are mobility compromised. We didn't want to increase any risk for them by asking them to drive into VTTI. So it's just on top of being nice and being concerned with their safety, it seemed like a good way to have a good, comfortable conversation. We always have two researchers present, one who's primarily doing the consultation themselves, and then the other who is there to take notes as well as provide additional input and feedback as everything progresses. And it really is the best of both worlds. We have a data-driven tailored plan, and we have these ideas, these interventions, as well as all these supporting documents that we can take out there. We also conduct a car fit session with them. I am a certified car fit technician, and we go through and talk with them about all the adjustments they can make, about various devices that may help make getting in and out of the vehicle easier. But really, all this it's what we're bringing to the table to have a conversation. We're finding that that's really, the conversation is a very important part of it. It's given us additional insights and opportunities to help. One person, we didn't find anything in the survey data about, but she had expressed issues with blind spots and high-speed adjacent traffic related to a prior crash that she'd had. Similarly, we had one participant who still continued to use his phone to do handheld conversations with. Even though he had Bluetooth in his car, he didn't know how to connect it. Or one other lady really wanted a backup camera and was considering doing an aftermarket solution, but didn't even know where to begin. So it's a very flexible process. The vehicles that these participants are driving, they're not the latest and greatest. They don't have the new advanced safety systems and features. You'll see a great picture in a few minutes of interior of this Highlander. But some sample interventions that we're going through. One of the more common ones is suggesting alternate routes. This is typically done to avoid a specific location, to avoid a roundabout, to avoid an intersection or a roadway, in hopes of reducing stress, to help the participant be a bit more comfortable behind the wheel. We also have talked a little bit about route planning, both to do so ahead of time so that you've got an idea of what you're heading into, as well as having a navigation system with you and using it even on common drives, just as backup. So if you, for example, had a route where you needed to go to 5 different locations, but the way that traffic was coming about, maybe you went out of order from what you were comfortable doing. Well, now you would have backup to be able to get where you needed to go, even if you weren't as familiar with the roads. Similarly, we've done some training. This has primarily been related to backup camera non-use. This is the picture I was talking about from that 2012 Highlander. This is an image of the interior, not of that car, but that make and model. That tiny little screen, which is actually smaller than a credit card, I measured, is the backup camera. Now, in this case, this older adult had said, yes, it's a backup camera, but it's of no use. It's too tiny to do anything. So I spent a little bit of time with him putting some objects behind the car and having him shift into reverse and just be able to look and realize that he couldn't see anything by looking over his shoulders or in his mirrors, but he could still clearly see it in the camera. So even if it wasn't a nice big 7 or 9 inch screen that you could see every detail in, it was still great to be able to take a quick glance at. We've also talked quite a bit about drowsiness. There was one adult in the driving data looked like he was really tired, really drowsy. And so it would be easy from his data to go, okay, well, this guy has trouble staying awake when he's driving. But we found out during the consultation that that was just some of his normal mannerisms. He tended to blink a lot and his face was really slack. So we talked about his sleep apnea. We talked about sleep hygiene. He actually has information connected to sort of a dashboard with regards to his CPAP machine, where he can look at his CPAP score to see how well he's actually sleeping. So what I had initially had coded as drowsiness was just sort of a normal facial expression for him. But we did find out that he does have some sleep hygiene issues. So again, led to that conversation. We're also seeing quite a bit of secondary task engagement. One individual was using her phone to navigate. That's great, except she was setting it on her lap and picking it up in her hand while she was trying to drive and change lanes. A little less than great. So this is going to be one that we talk about tomorrow with this participant. But one of the suggestions there may be a phone mount, assuming that she doesn't have like Apple CarPlay or Android Auto or something equivalent, so that she can still use her phone to navigate, but do it in a more safe way. We also had one person who wanted to floss his teeth while he was driving. And in general, flossing is good. It's great. Flossing while driving, not quite so much. So in many cases, we're finding that this is information that they maybe already know, but we're there to remind them of things, of bad habits that may have crept in over the years. A few early emerging trends from the survey data we're seeing, just like you'd expect, people are expressing discomfort with heavy traffic, highways, interstates. And everybody is mentioning that they're having a specific trouble location or specific roadway. Excuse me. We're also finding some residual driving anxiety from prior crashes. One wasn't too long ago, it was in May of 2020, but another one was back in 2015. And this person is still feels like it affects them. Through the consultations themselves, we're finding that the conversation simply brings out content that wasn't captured otherwise. And the back and forth conversation really facilitates clarification and allows a deep dive into whatever issue happens to be present. We're also finding that participants are very excited and they're open to communicating with us on this. Simply raising awareness of some of their safety and mobility issues may have really strong benefits, whether it's the use of a backup camera or mirror checking behavior. And then we're also finding that devoting attention to their specific situation and needs, it really seems to be impactful. Social isolation can be a considerable problem for older adults, especially those on mobility limitations. And so far, we've gotten 100% positive feedback. I realize our N is relatively low in this, and hopefully it continues on this trajectory, but we've not gotten any of the, well, I've been driving longer than you've been alive, or why are you telling me this? You know, everything has been really positive. These are a couple quotes from some of our participants so far. For example, I love it. I realize it's on there 3 times. That actually came from one participant in 3 different parts of this consultation session. He was just really happy about what we were talking about and how we were proceeding. One participant said, "This is exactly what I needed." She needed an outside voice to look at what she was doing and point out things that might help keep her a little bit safer. Another person had expressed that they love doing studies. They've been in a couple at VTTI before, but this way they're actually getting a benefit out of it. They're not just helping us do research. So at a high level, you know, this is really hitting a nerve in a very good way with our participants that we've been working with. And now I'm going to go ahead and turn it back over to John to bring this to a conclusion. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Brian. So our vision for the impact here is, of course, to enhance driving safety for these individuals. But it goes beyond that and really to helping them with their personal mobility. Could be through driving, could be through getting rides from different sources to access the needs that they need to access. And it really goes beyond even driving safety and mobility to just having needs met. For example, you know, it's not gonna, even though mobility is important, it's not always about mobility. It might just be about using telehealth to meet with a physician. You don't actually have to get there in every case. Or it might be getting better access to and better knowledge of how to access delivery services, from groceries to medications to anything else. And ultimately, we really believe that this is, through enhancing all these other elements, we're enhancing people's overall life satisfaction, and that's our vision for how we're impacting people's lives. So what are our next steps? As I mentioned, I think previously, we're going to do an interim program evaluation. We wanted to figure out which aspects are working well, great, which maybe are superfluous and can be eliminated, what aspects need to be revised, and what can we add to improve the program. And of course, we're continually collecting additional data. As Brian noted, we're going to go and meet with another participant tomorrow. And one of the big things we're thinking about is, how do we transform this program in a way where we can expand its footprint and maximize the overall impact, to a far broader audience. It's easier said than done, but that's our vision, that's our goal. So I'd just like to encourage you to please reach out to us if you'd like to continue this discussion or collaborate in some way. We'd love to hear your thoughts. There's my email address, and we'd also love to hear your questions or comments that you might have, right now. So thank you for your attention thus far, and let us hear what you're thinking.
Thank you so much, John and Brian. This program definitely sounds like something that is meaningful for the participants, and it's not just something that we're doing, of course, for our own personal edification from a researcher's perspective. So I'm sure those comments that we saw are representative of all who might have the opportunity to engage in this process. We are going to open up the floor. If anyone has some questions, we are just open up your mic and speak them. I will also watch the chat and see if there's any questions posted in the chat as well.
Hey, John, this is Susie. I have a suggestion.
Hey, Susie, love to hear it.
Yeah. When my father was alive, he would ask me periodically to evaluate his driving, and I would. And he'd had some neck surgeries. And so one of the things he really had trouble with was the blind spot. And so I would, I would ride with him as a passenger and give him some advice similar to what you're doing, but on a much smaller scale. And then something that family members told me is that every time one of them was a passenger, he would mention that and ask them to help him remember to do things, whatever it was I had mentioned. So that kind of, every time he would say it, that would reinforce it in his mind too, to be very careful of whatever it was, the blind spot. And so having them mention this to passengers and ask them to help them with whatever trouble spots they had might be useful.
Yeah, thanks for the comment. Thanks for listening in today. Yeah, there's all kinds of elements related to, other stakeholders, like you're saying, like a daughter or a spouse, or could be anyone, a friend who can join in and really help to reinforce some of these elements. But we're also, even though obviously we're in the very early stages of this, we're also seeing some of the other flip side of it, where, one person's spouse was one of her major sources of stress because of the nature of how he interacted with her and whatever it was. And so it can get, there's a lot of complexity to it, but yeah, I think your comments are well taken, and to leverage those kinds of interactions and magnify their impact could be really beneficial.
John, David Cack with the Western Transportation Institute, Montana State University. We know that owning and operating a car is pretty expensive. And as you talked about, in rural areas, unfortunately, there's usually not a lot of alternatives. Have you looked at all about whether owning and operating the car is a challenge for the people that you're working with?
Well, I mean, I think that what we're seeing is that I think that they feel that owning and operating the vehicle is the only option that they have based on their location. So you know a lot about rural environments where you are, but there's just simply going to almost by definition, there's just going to be less access to things, any kind of transit, any kinds of van service. It's just going to be reduced and limited, and those have a lot of costs as well. And so I think we're seeing people who do continue to own and operate vehicles, maybe past the point where they would want to. People who do continue driving, maybe past the point where they want to, just because they see it as a necessity. And so, so we're looking into ways to either, prolong their safe driving life as much as possible, minimize driving in other areas where it can be, and utilize whatever services might be available.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
John, I was curious, how long are the consultations typically taking? You do a pre and a post consultation, is that correct?
Well, the consultation is there's mainly one consultation, and so We might meet with them at the very end to do a debrief, kind of a consultation, but there's mainly one consultation. So that's a great question that I meant to mention. It takes it's been taking like an hour and a half to 2 hours. I mean, it's an in-depth, in-home visit where we really, as Brian emphasized this point several times, we really use all of our assessments and the driving data as well as all the surveys to really initiate a conversation. And the conversations have been very rich. Really, the participants have all been very engaged. You could see from all those comments that everyone's, I would say, not just engaged, but positively engaged. And so that rich, robust conversation takes about an hour and a half to 2 hours. And that includes, Brian doing the car fit session.
Okay.
And as he mentioned, he's a certified car fit technician. So.
Now, is there a session that takes place before as part of the initial data collection process that you use in the evaluation later on?
How would you answer that?
Or is it just surveys?
Well, at the onset, when they come in, they do surveys, and I'm able to sit there and talk with them as they're doing surveys. And if they have any kind of specific issues that they mention at that time, those are things that I make notes of.
Okay.
But in general, the idea is that the initial part is survey and just kind of collect some data up front. John had mentioned the kind of exit part of it after they get their vehicle deinstalled. And that's a structured interview that I go through with them and really talk about each of the things that we suggested. Did it work? Did it not work? What could have gone better? How do you feel? That kind of thing.
And how long are
that's also at the exit session is where we really ask them some questions like, how do you feel about this program? Did it help you? Is it improving your life in the way we think it is? Or is that too lofty a goal for what we're doing? And I mean, I think the first person to have exited the program wanted to know, how can we continue this? She wanted to, it's not just, okay, I'm done, thanks, pay me my money. It's, I want this to continue. When's our, can we have a monthly session or whatever, however she phrased it, but she wanted it to continue.
Yeah. I had another question. Anybody jump in if you have questions as well. I had a question about the, I guess the transcribing, I guess you could say, of the driving recordings, the naturalistic driving recordings. How is that being done? Is it one person that's basically evaluation?
Standard techniques that we use to, this is the naturalistic driving approach is something that we've been doing at VTTI for, at least around 25 years. So we have a variety of standard approaches for that. We don't have time to go into it today, but for collecting the data, ensuring the data are secure, bringing the data in-house and evaluating the data from a variety of perspectives. But do you want to add anything to what I just said, Brian?
So the actual looking at the data and actually coding things, that's something that I am doing right now.
Okay.
And I will pull up a video file and I will find an instance of a right turn at a traffic light. And then I'll code information surrounding that. Was there a lead vehicle? What kind of gap was there between them? Did they come to a complete stop at the light if it was needed? To what degree, like how many G-forces was the braking event? Just a number of things like that. So it's done as objectively as we can. Rather than more of a sit back and just watch and get a feeling kind of a thing. So it's pretty standardized.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just asking.
We're seeing things that, without the video, we wouldn't get, like seeing someone floss his teeth while he's driving.
You're not going to admit to that.
Well, he's got a good, he's thinking, whatever, I don't know what he's, I'm just going to visit a friend or a girl or have a meeting or something. He's thinking that flossing makes good sense. I just went to the Dairy Queen or whatever. But we're trying to point out, yeah, it does make great sense. Let's find a place to pull over, a safe place to pull over, take care of that before your meeting. And he's of course, yes, that's a great idea. What was I thinking? So that's a big part of this, is just reminding people of things that in some way, shape, or form they already knew. So.
Yeah, and I think it's something not just the older adults, but all of us drivers probably need a little bit of assessment every now and then to remind us of the safe driving habits. We have one question in the chat. Have you considered how this could or should be done over time? As you mentioned earlier, driving abilities may deteriorate as the driver ages.
Yeah, that's a great question. So, one thing we're looking to do, as we mentioned, is expand figure out a way to transform the program to expand its footprint. Right now there's a lot of intensive research or activity. Brian talked about all the naturalistic data collection and the review, and so we're thinking about how can we keep the program quality high but expand its footprint. But that's just a great question, a great point. Is not just expanding the footprint sort of geographically, if you will, or to more and more people, but how do we continue to fulfill that our participants' request, right? How do we fulfill that in a longer term basis? And maybe the answer will be the same for both. Maybe once we figure out how to transform the program to have a broader footprint and reach more people, that will also provide an avenue to have the program to be more of a longitudinal, continual, set of touch points with participants where they can continue to derive the benefit after these initial 4 months.
John, my dad is 83, and I would love to have him have an assessment like this. So I think the potential is valuable for this in rural and urban, and just for everybody. Is that your intent, to make this a kind of service available to nationwide, or what?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that's the goal. But I mean, it's the way it's designed and implemented right now is not feasible. So that's what we've been saying. We need to really figure out what's working, what's not working, and then ultimately figure out how to transform it to increase the footprint. Where does he live?
I would love that. And it also takes a little bit of the onus off of the other people to point out to them that maybe their driving isn't great or that it could be improved.
Well, yeah, and that brings up a whole, our goal is to help keep people driving longer, safer, but ultimately you're going to run into people where it may be best for them to think about curtailing their driving or giving up the keys altogether. That certainly hasn't been our focus to this point, but
Right.
You're going to run into people where that is that's going to be the recommendation. And so that's a harder nut to crack, as many of us have seen with.
But then you've got all this data that can be the bad guy rather than you be the bad guy.
Exactly. I found in my life that the data always win the argument. So that's a great point.
Yeah, and we have a question, I believe, from Brandon Pitts, if he wants to jump
Okay,
in.
yep. Thank you so much. I know we're running out of time, but this is Brandon Pitts, assistant professor at Purdue University in industrial engineering, and also faculty associate with the Center on Aging and the Life course. Just a quick question. Wendy Rogers and Sarah Saja and Neil Charnas have put out the 3rd edition of a book called Designing for Older Adults. And there's a chapter in the book where they actually talk about older people tending, in comparison to younger drivers, display safer driving behaviors, and they actually self-regulate their driving behaviors to account for declines in visual, cognitive domains, what have you. So I was just curious, were you surprised to find out that there are some people in the older age that are engaging in these unsafe behaviors? Like you talked about the guy flossing, that's surprising to me, just based on what their research has found.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a broader topic in terms of driving safety. We're thinking also about mobility. In terms of driving safety, we know that older adults crash in terms of raw numbers far less than people who are younger. And so we might say, well, they're safer, but then you have to factor in that there are fewer of them and they're driving far fewer miles per year. And so their exposure is less. And so, yeah, we do know that many adults have the metacognition to be aware of their deficits. And I think that's what you're getting at. And then they compensate for them. So I'm having visual problems, or I don't see as well as I used to, so I don't drive at night. It's a very common one. Maybe there's a sense of my reaction time, you know, whether it's measured or not, but my reaction time isn't what it used to be. And so I no longer feel comfortable driving on the interstate highway because the speeds are too high, which is, you know, ironic because those are the safe, you know, in terms of miles driven, those are the safest environments to be in. There's controlled access, you know, highway versus where you're going through the city streets with intersections, and then you get into problems with, you know, missing a stop sign or a turn signal, or making an unprotected turn across path where gap judgments come into play, and then there's a much higher likelihood of a crash. And so I'm not sure I'm answering your question, but yeah, it's that people do self-regulate in a variety of ways, but it's not sufficient in every case to address the problem. And again, we're looking not only at driving safety, but a broader, trying to take a broader perspective in terms of mobility and how to make people, you know, not just safer drivers, but more comfortable, lower anxiety drivers, and how to get their needs fulfilled in a variety of ways. So, yeah.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Great question.
Yeah, and I know we're probably at time, but there was one other question that was in the chat that I at least wanted to present to you. Jillian asked, could this be a partnership referral program from doctors or social services? Just thinking about that implementation and expansion piece of the program.
Well, absolutely. We hope that it gets to that point one day where, you know, people are routinely recommending, referring people into this kind of a program, but that's where we need to expand the footprint first. I mean, we only have one Brian right now, so
Yeah.
one Brian unit, as we like to say. So we need more Brian units, or we need to figure out a way to transform the program. But that is the ultimate goal, right? So make it like, you need this medication, you need this physical therapy, and you need to get into this this road trip program.
Yeah.
Exactly. That's brilliant.
Well, it's definitely a worthwhile program, and I appreciate the work that you and your team are doing on it. Thank you, John and Brian, for presenting this information to us. And I posted our CATM research project webpage in the chat as well. So feel free to click on that link or copy that link in the next minute or so that you can go to our webpage and check out this project, as well as the other projects that we have going on within the Center for Advanced Transportation Mobility. I want to wish everybody a happy holiday season. I hope that everyone will be safe and return from your holiday celebrations safe and sound in the new year.
Thank you, Miranda, and thank you for your support of this project.
Oh, no problem at all. Take care.
Thank you.